good? All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. We've got a bunch of really high qualified people who have a lot of experience and knowledge to share with you. And I want to introduce them, so I'll start with the least impressive. No, I'm just kidding. I'm Kathleen Mellano, and I'm an assistant professor at Springfield College. I did, but then I felt bad, so. No. Kathleen Mellano from Springfield College. My previous educational experience is from Miami University, where I got my master's, and my PhD from Michigan State University. So you can see why the panel is organized as it is. I've done a lot of consulting with younger athletes and then collegiate athletes, a lot of the time during my graduate studies and a little bit now. Dan, to my left, is a very established consultant. He's a professor at Michigan State University. He is a director of the Institute for the Study of Youth Sport, and his consulting experiences are vast. He's done a lot of work with national teams, and it's ranged from working with athletes, skiing athletes, auto racing. He's done some work all over the board in terms of levels and ages. We have then Robin Vealey from Miami University, who's also a professor there, and she has a vast experience as well. She's done some work with national teams and Olympic athletes, and she is now currently working more so with high school athletes and collegiate athletes at Miami and beyond. And then next we have Justin Sua, who brings a practitioner perspective exclusively. That's what we like at this panel, engagement like that. Let's bring it. So he's currently working with the Tampa Rays, and he has previous experience with military. He used to be at IMG as well, and another few professional organizations across football and baseball. Right. So just a quick note before we dive into the content of this panel. I want to note that we have some really impressive people here who have other obligations immediately following this panel. I know they're super great, they're super wonderful, and you're probably going to want to chat with them. They've got to bounce really quickly. So can we just let them go, and then you can catch them another time at the conference. I'm not as impressive, and I'll be here, so if you want to talk to me, please feel free to chat me up. I'm okay with that. I want to introduce, before I give them the floor, I want to introduce why I'm doing this panel. I'm in my first year at Springfield College, and so my experience is far less compared to the people sitting to my left. And my inspiration for this panel came from being a student in Dan's applied class. And I remember in Dan's class, he loves to assign reading. He's big on assigning about 4 chapters a night for reading. And in order to do well, you had to read. And so I did so religiously. I read everything. And I wanted to know everything. I wanted to be very good at the applied side, and I wanted it to be cake for me. And so I read everything, and I was working really hard. And I remember one night in particular, I was reading this text. It was wonderfully written. It had a lot of good information. It was great. I had all my highlighters out. I was scribbling notes feverishly. My brow was furrowed, just sitting there scratching through my paper, 18 highlighters all over the place. And then suddenly I just stopped. I'd been reading for a really long time, and I was getting a little bit fatigued, I think. And I stopped, and I remember putting my highlighter right in the crease of the book and looking down at my book as if it had just punched me in the face. I looked down, sat back, and I went through a series of emotions in that moment. First, I threw myself a very sad pity party, and I thought, what the heck is going on? I'm doing everything right. I'm reading everything exactly as I should. I'm doing it all right, but I still feel like I'm bad at this. I'm still failing. I'm not good at this. And so I said, oh, poor me, why, right? My pity parties don't last very long, usually. So then I got really angry, and I started to pick a fight with my text. I was like, all right, come on. Whoever wrote this cannot be this perfect. There's no way. It looks so easy. It's so clean. It's so polished. There's no way that's what it's been like for this person. That they're so full of knowledge, but it's not that easy. I'm living it. It's not that easy. And so then my next thing was I was like, I'm fired up now. I've got to go talk to Dan. I got to hunt him down. So I did. The next day in the halls, I found Dan, super eager, ran up to him, and I said, Dan, why don't the greats ever share their failure? Why don't they share that with us? I want to know that. I want to know that other people have failed and they are still successful. So let's write a book. Let's write a book, Dan. And I thought I was letting Dan in on this huge favor by having him write a book with me about this thing, right? I'm like, yeah, come on, Dan. Dan listens very patiently, lets me go on this eager rant. And then he goes, pump the brakes, Mellano. Let's do a panel at AASP. So here we are. We're at AASP. Stay tuned for the book, okay? It'll come out sometime when I can convince him. But here we are. And so the reason that I labeled or named this panel as I did is because it's kind of a play on words, and it can be read two ways. It can be read as ImPerfect Consulting or ImPerfect Consulting. And so, you knew this. And so as you read and as you learn, everybody looks perfect. Everything is presented so cleanly and so polished. But what you actually learn when you ask people who have lived it and who have experienced, you learn that they are imperfect like those of us who are learning still. And so I wanted to showcase that and bring that to life here within this panel and have some people who have vast experience and knowledge share the times that they've actually failed and how it's shaped what they do now. So that's how I got this panel pulled together. And when I presented this idea to them, it wasn't met with a sense of pride or anything like they didn't want to share. Instead, they were eager to be vulnerable in front of you all, and they said, man, where do I even start? What do I choose? Where do I go with this? And so they got some time to reflect on it, and it was nice for me to hear that because I'm like, okay, I'm not alone in how I feel. And so this is true. I'm right in thinking that there are some failures that occur for different people across all stages. So what we're going to do today is try to emphasize that making mistakes is actually really common, especially when you're learning. And then we're going to stress that that can be a tool that you use to sharpen up your practice and hone in on your craft. Right? So the way we're going to do that is we're going to present stories. So we're going to tell you stories very much in the way that I just told you a story. And each panel member is going to have a few minutes to tell you a story or a time that they failed or they made a big mistake, what they did about it, what they should have done about it, and then what they learned. So hopefully that comes out in each of these stories, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Good, thank you. I should say it's great to be here, but when you get picked to be a star on a failure panel, I don't know what that means. So, except I've been doing it for years. And take one look at me. It's clear that I'm the imperfect, not the I-perfect. A couple things, just a couple comments before I jump into the story. One of the things I think is important is sometimes you just don't know if you failed or not. You give a session or somebody doesn't come back. So mentoring somebody right now, sometimes I go, there's just times you're not going to know. So it's, in a roundabout way, it sounds crazy. It's nice to know when you fail because at least you know you can do something about it. The person didn't come back. I don't know why. Or I gave a session, I don't know how it went. Nobody gave me much feedback. So you're going to get those situations. So I guess first I'd say that's normal. The second is, I think we heard in our keynote today, Karch talked about, just like athletes are going to make mistakes, consultants are going to make mistakes. And there's a short-term response. How are you going to deal with it if it's in the middle of a meeting? And there's a long-term response. How am I going to reflect on it and grow from it? So mine, I went back in time because I thought it was an appropriate one. A large number of years ago, I was doing some work with the U.S. ski team, and I had worked with the freestyle team. And I was asked to come in and give a presentation with the men's alpine team, which was an important presentation because if it went well, then I'd be asked to work with them and follow up. So I planned the presentation and went in. And I had worked with freestyle skiing for a year or two, so I had some background. It didn't start out well at all. The first, because of professional meeting, I'll be careful with language, but the director introduced me and the other people, the mind effers are coming in. That was the introduction. Wow. So then I walked in and go, well, that's nice, and one of our goals, remember this is like 20 years ago, we're trying to destigmatize sports psychology, and that intro didn't help too much. And then my presentation, when I had worked with the freestyle athletes, they were new to the Olympic movement, and they were almost like a family, and they were really willing to share and open. And I based this presentation on people who were going to identify challenges. Well, as the presentation went on, there was no audience participation. Like, what are your challenges? Nobody raised their hand. And it was just, it just didn't go like I thought it was going to go. So the problem analysis is what I learned from that is first, whenever I can, I try to get a hold of the person introducing me and at least sort of set the stage. You can't always control that. Short term, I think I went in and I immediately said, well, I won't say that, Mr. X was just tried to, gave a joke, and we've all kind of given jokes about clinical psychologists or mind effers or whatever it is. But it's important that we not make jokes about that, because all of us sometimes in our life may have an issue. We need to go see somebody. And then I self-disclose, like when my daughter died, I went and saw somebody. Example, because I was pretty messed up. So I tried to deal with that on the shorthand. The no audience participation I couldn't do much with. I was seasoned enough that I kind of threw in the challenges I know I had learned from other skiers, but it just didn't go. And after the fact, when I reflected on it, I made the mistake, I prepared for the talk, but I made the mistake of thinking the Alpine men's team would be a similar culture like the freestyle team. And it was just a different animal. It was much more like high-level collegiate football, a lot of macho behavior, don't show your weaknesses. And the freestyle was different. So when I went in, I just didn't anticipate this. So actually, again, this is many years ago, but there was a book at the time I read after the fact, just on the edge of crazy, and it was a journalist who spent a year with the team, and I learned a lot from reading that book. I ended up working a number of years with the freestyle team, not the Alpine. I think it wasn't a disaster, but it just didn't go as well. So I think the thing that I've always remembered that about, even in the same sport, I've got to understand the context. And I wish I had asked more questions about the context of the men's team, talked to some of the people. And it was interesting, after I did the presentation, I talked to some of the individual members of the men's team, and they were very open, et cetera. But they didn't want to, it was a very competitive spot. So they didn't want to come up and disclose something in front of the other people. We're on the freestyle team, that wasn't like, so that was an error there. I tried to learn from the mistakes, didn't feel good about it. But that's sort of the long term. Sometimes it isn't going to go well. I mean, we heard a great example in the keynote today. Okay, we can have a pity party, we deal with it. You're always going to feel bad about it, and then you move on. And in the end, I think you need to have your own, short terms in a presentation or a meeting. And give another one. I met with a young gymnast one time. I was exhausted after 45 minutes. The kid couldn't answer what do you do to mentally prepare? I don't know. And this was like 45 minutes of I don't know. And it was like a disaster. And I tried everything, and trying to figure out from it. You've got to know how to deal with them short term, and then long term. Is that my cup of tea? Am I right for that kind of person? What can I do to manage it? And obviously take time to reflect. So I think I've used my 5 or 6 minutes, so I'll turn it over to Robin.
Good. I wanted to say, we good, Ken? Hello? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Your people will take care of it.
Okay, yeah, I know.
She has to have her people do everything. They made the notes for you. Go ahead.
Okay. You tell me to shut up. Okay. I think it's really interesting that Kathleen, the way she opened and the way she set this up, because it just shows so much about being reflective in terms of practice, which is what this panel is about. But for the Midwest Sports Psych Conference, I can't remember, a year or two ago, we had a panel of invited people who work with athletes. And I can't remember who was on the panel now, but Kathleen was on, and Kathleen was kind of on, sorry, but she was like the student, sorry, students. And I knew Kathleen had, really done some good work, but I thought she was more of a researcher. Anyway, she hit it out of the park. She was by far the best person on the panel because of her reflectiveness, her authenticity, and that's what makes a great consultant. So you need to, and the fact that she is concerned about that and she understands the failure, and that makes her a really good consultant. So anyway, just wanted to give you that. So it was really interesting to get this invitation, and like Dan, there's so many mistakes, like Kathleen said, that I thought about. But I think for me, early in my career, what I realized really early on, and particularly in this one situation, that I was viewing consulting as this revolutionary event as opposed to an evolutionary process. And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to wow them. I got to go in, I got to wow them. And, Sean McCann likes to talk about education is not behavior change. So we're dealing with psycho-behavioral change. That is really hard to do. And so this was really early on, and I got invited to work with this team. And it was a team in the sport that I played and I really like. And so it was a 2-year contract. But when I first met with the coach, she said she hired me because she needed to win that year. She was going to be fired. And, and that's never a really good situation. But I wanted to stay in the situation. Another thing I learned from Ken Ravizza is, you go in and you have to figure out if you can work with that team. But again, I was young and with ego, and I really wanted this gig. And I think I didn't clarify what needed to be done, et cetera. So I met with the coach, we set the parameters. I noticed immediately that there was issues with the culture, development. The coach wasn't real and forthcoming, and again, I was just trying to be the nice person and upbeat. And so now, at this stage in my career, if I was in that position, I would work with the staff. I would work with the coaching staff and say, and I would just be forthcoming about kind of what I saw was the problem. But I continued. Then I met with the players, the athletes, and so early on, and I see this in my students too, and I mean, my personality is I like people to like me. And I think for all of us as consultants, you have to kind of understand yourself, and that gets in the way. Because, if you're a strength and conditioning person, when the athletes come in, you don't have to wow them. You just need to train them. Why do we always feel like we need to wow people, right, and get them to like us? And versus, here's the work. And, you've got to rep the work, if you will. So when I met with the players, I felt I needed to win them over. There were these culture problems. They liked me. I gained their trust. We had some good things that happened, but there wasn't a lot of mental performance development that really kind of went on that year. So the second year then, I talked to the coaches and I tried to focus more on that, but you know what? I was an entertainer by then. And this happens a lot with college athletes where they're very busy. I find with elite athletes, they'll do the work more. But one thing I've learned and that I don't do now is I'm not going to work harder than the athlete. It's like I tell my students in the class, if I'm working harder than you, that's a problem. And early on, I was really willing to do that, and this was a great lesson to me. And, Kathleen, some of her questions, what did I do about it? And nothing. I mean, I wasn't aware. I was just trying to navigate the culture at the time. And what I should have done now would be provide the coach with a list of conditions. Here's what kind of needs to happen. And now to spend substantial time with the coaching staff to kind of to get to know them and the culture before I met with the team, et cetera. Situated myself more as a mental performance consultant and not a feel-good facilitator. I mean, and we all know that athletes just want to talk to you sometimes. I tell my students, most important thing you can do is be a good human. And I am a good human. I am. But I don't want to just do that. And I want to be like a strength and conditioning professional. And this is kind of what you have to do. When we first started in applied work, I remember it was always seen as the icing on the cake, or something that is, if you want to do this, you can do it. You know what? No. And Peter Haberl has said this. No, you need to do this. And so now with a team, I would go in, and so I require every individual to meet with me at least twice. And then I use the Urban Meyer, the 10-80-10, where 10% are totally with you, 80% are kind of on the fence, and 10% want nothing to do with you. And so I don't worry about that last 10%, but I focus on the first 10%, and then the 80% in the middle, I just try to win a few over in terms of the group meetings, and then kind of follow through with things. So I just think that we need to demand more of the athletes. And when Kathleen asked me my key takeaway, I wrote down, educate to hook their interest. educate, this is kind of what we can do, but you have to rep the work for behavior change. And one of the questions, sorry, I'm going too much here, but she sent me, one of the things was, what's a recent or favorite moment of success? And I know I'm stealing your thunder here, but as I thought about it, I've just been working with a hockey player. And so one of my earlier times, I think of a successful moment when an athlete gave me feedback, and I gotta say a swear word here, but you know, this kid came in and said, Dr. Vealey, this shit really works. And I thought, wow, okay, that's great. But this hockey player came back just before I came out here. Dr. Vealey, I know what I need to do. And meaning that, and so it's not like a placebo effect that I'm having on him. I know what I need to do because I've learned to teach him, this is the way we have to rep the work for you to get better. It's like, again, a personal trainer, a strength and conditioning, where they come and they see me, and we go through the rotation, but then you've got to work on your own. And that's just the expectation. And I really think our field needs to think about that, because I think sometimes we're not taken seriously because of that. So I'm not the queen of fun anymore when I meet with the athletes. You know, they love to do all the fun activities, but then I might try to hook them with that, but then they have to rep the work. And it's my job to kind of help them set that up, but then they have to do the work, and that's on them. So that's the lesson that I learned, and it really changed my practice a lot.
Hey guys, I'm really grateful to be here on this panel, and when Dr. Vealey was just speaking, she took me back to 2005. So before I got into sports psychology, I got my grad degree from University of Utah in 2011, started in 2009. But for 6 years, I was a high school teacher. And when you train and study to become a high school teacher, you go through a number of different trainings and educational pedagogy and teaching pedagogy to learn how to effectively teach and shape young minds. And I just remembered this as you were just speaking about this. One of the best lessons I ever got is, so I was to teach my session, and I had a supervisor there watching me. And I thought I prepared for it. I was excited to show this supervisor how good of a teacher I was, because then afterwards it went into my hiring and all of that. And I remember teaching the lesson to a group of high school students, juniors and seniors. And I don't know, have you ever taught a session or did something where you're in the middle of it, you're like, I am nailing this. I am knocking it out of the park. And that's where it was. My stories were on point, my timing was on point, the acronyms were working, I was throwing in memes and the slang of their term, getting the laughs, nailing it. And when it was over, I thought, that was awesome. What an amazing experience. So I go to his office, and I sit down, again, this is 2004. And then sitting down, and I'm just like, oh man, what a rush, what a great experience. And just body language, I was looking at him, and he just wasn't reciprocating the same energy. I thought, okay, he just must be having a bad day. And he looks at me, he goes, how do you think it went? And I said, it was okay. But deep down, I was like, I killed it. And he goes, okay. He goes, I thought it was okay too. And that, my heart sunk. I thought to myself, okay, what do you mean, okay? And he says, I'm going to teach you something. And anytime a teacher or mentor says that, it's like, okay, I better listen, because this is probably not going to go down very well, but it's going to be memorable. And he says, there are two types of teachers. There are magnifying glass approach teachers, and there are mirror approach teachers. The magnifying glass approach teacher is a teacher who focuses on the student. They are more focused on, what is the student going to say? What are they going to experience? How are they going to feel? What are their stories they're going to share? What are their answers going to be? The mirror approach teacher is focused on what he or she's going to say, what they're going to do, the stories they're going to say. More of the sage on the stage instead of the guide on the side. And he looked me dead in the eyes, and he says, you're a mirror approach teacher. The reason you weren't effective today is because you got in the way. And you just reminded me of that. And your experience reminded me of that. And I took that with me. And I think the sessions that I've taught or the experiences that I failed the most, and I failed so many times, it's when I get in the way. It's when I become the mere approach consultant. Hey, listen to how great this story is. Listen to how wonderful this is. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? As opposed to what are the athletes going to do? What's the coach going to say? More question-based and more getting into what they wanted. And so, sorry, I didn't plan on saying that. It's happening real time. This is organic.
Keep going.
There's so many failures. Another failure happened at the IMG Academy. Now, anyone who worked at IMG Academy, there's a lot of failures that happen there. When you get a room full of little kids, you never know what's going to go down. Like anything could come out at any moment, and things could fail massively. And you laugh about it afterwards. But I remember teaching a group of tennis players. They're about 100 to 150. I don't want to exaggerate. You get about that many, right? Youngsters from all over the country, all over the world who are in there, and it's pouring rain outside, and I'm teaching this session. And I'm really working on my storytelling. And one of the things that I really tried to do is I tried to study comedians to learn about their timing. Try to study people who are directors in movies to study how the arc of a story. And so I was really trying to learn how to be a better storyteller by studying comedians and reading books and videos and so forth. So I thought, here's my chance to practice. And I packed the session with some stories to bring some humor in. Because sometimes early on in my career, I wasn't as authentic. I wanted to come off and pontificate and act like I used big words like I knew what I was talking about. And I was struggling. And so I tried to add a little humor. And as I'm teaching the session, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but as you're teaching, you're working with someone, you're starting to get away from who you truly are. You start to try to act like someone who you're not. And I felt it. I felt it in the middle of that presentation. And I thought, okay, maybe they're not going to notice. Maybe these kids don't know who I am. They don't know me. But if you know people or kids, they can sniff out BS from a mile away. So much to the point to where this kid in the very front, he raises his hand. I said, yes. And he says, stop trying to be funny and just do your job. I was so embarrassed. I was laughed at. And it wasn't like I got hot. You can't tell if I get red as like my skin. Obviously, you can't tell I get red. But I felt like I was bright red. I started to sweat. And Timmy, the tennis player from Turkey, was in my dome. Like for the rest of the session, I was struggling. And the lesson that I learned from that is to be yourself. Be authentic to who you truly are. If you smile a lot, you smile a lot. That's who it's what I do. And hey, you smile too much. Tone your happiness down. Tone it down. And I've worked with military soldiers, like, I can't speak like this. Like, I can't. Like, there's an energy. And yeah, there are moments you have to modulate your energy and be aware of your emotions, but be authentic to you. And lastly, the last one, I think I've failed so many times, but I think the biggest failure happens, it's more internally, and people don't realize it. In 2010, that was my first AASP conference, and I left dejected. I left fearful. I saw all these presentations and these keynote speeches and these professors and these grad students who were so much smarter than me and so much bright, and they knew the right people and they knew what to say and they knew the research. And I'm sitting here like, I have no idea what's going on. I can't get up there and do what they're doing. I'm not going to be that good. And I started to listen to it. The biggest failure I made early on was listening, taking counsel from my fears, and being afraid to send out that tweet because I was afraid of what somebody was going to think. And the people I was most afraid of were the people in this room at this conference, my cohorts, professors. Oh, wait, what are you doing tweeting that? You're leaving this research out. Well, I only have 140 characters. I can't include that in the tweet. Or why are you writing that blog post? Why are you writing a book on parenting? Or are you the guru on parenting? And no, I'm not. But are you going to pay my bills? Are you going to put the roof over my head? I'm going to go and I'm going to do it. And I think there have been moments in my life where my wife she's like, why aren't you sharing? Why aren't you go out there and working and finding those clients? It's like, because I'm scared. I don't know if I have what it takes. And that imposter syndrome starts to come in. And I think it's snagged on me for weeks. It's got me for a day. And there have been moments where I didn't create content or put myself out there because I was afraid of what other people thought. And those were my biggest failures. Instead of focusing on helping people, I was focusing on looking good and not trying to mess the field up. And it's been messy. It's been messy. I'm still messy. To this day, it's messy. But and I still get snagged by it occasionally to this day. But yeah, those are my feels. And the lesson I learned is don't take counsel from your fears. Lean into it. Do that article. Send that tweet. Go ask to do that speech or presentation, and good things happen. Bad things happen too, but a lot of times good things happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kathleen said I could jump in here. Two things. First, what Robin said I think is really important about, we're not here to entertain. One thing I got from business consulting is how do you find a balance between support and challenge? And you're constantly like, I need to pass a good guy or good gal test, so, they come. But at the same time, when do I kind of say, well, Kathleen, it's time to stop the pity party and face the music? And you're always trying to find that level. And a lot of it depends, if Al Pettipaw was here, on relationship. And the better you can build the relationship, the more I can challenge you. So I've been thinking a lot about that the last few years, about how do I kind of modulate that support and challenge. And if the relationship isn't there yet, then I might have to not challenge as much as I'd like. The other thing, Justin, when he's talking about the mirror versus the microscope, one thing I learned from going to AASP supervision workshops was there's a cycle. It's pretty normal if you haven't been a consultant before to be all about me. Because I got to get out in front of the group and I'm really scared and I don't want to look like an idiot. And so I think the advice he's giving is superb, but you need to realize, hey, it is all about me the first few times, as much as I don't want it to be. But if a year later it's still all about you, you got problems. So it's sort of that idea that at the front end, I haven't done this before. It is kind of natural to be all about me, but I got to be dropping that as quick as I get some confidence that I can do it. So I think that tied in pretty well with that. Turn it back to the boss.
All right. I know as a student, I would have wanted a nice, clean slide of takeaways. So here y'all go. Here are the lessons that they learned from the stories that they told you. Some of them they actually didn't share. Some are quotes that map to the stories that they tell. But these are takeaways that you're going to hear from other people when they discuss their failures. Some of them are very tangible. I wasn't planning to ask this question, but I think I can ask y'all since you're so on your toes. I know when I hear stories of people failing and then I see that they succeed, I wonder what happens in the middle. What's the thing that you think, is there some particular thing that made you continue, persist, or is there a tangible thing there that kept you from bailing on yourself?
For me, and this is going to sound so like cliche, but love for what you do. You were going to say it too? Okay, good. I'm not. You just love it. It's just the essence of who you are. It's that you think about it all the time, and you just love the topic. You just feel like you can help people. You love the people you work with, and then for me, that's what just keeps me going, and to navigate through the fear. And there's this quote, this axiom: if you can't stop thinking about it, don't stop doing it. And there've been moments where I'm like you, I'm done. I can't do it. I'm the worst mental skills coach in the world. I can't do this. And then the next day, it's like always on your mind, and you find yourself navigating towards the latest research or book, and you're like, oh, I just love this. For me, it's love.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Some of it, I almost think it's sort of a life skill thing. I was an athlete when I was younger, but I was never great, so I always had to work really hard. It's sort of the Pitbull Approach. I grab a hold of your leg and I gnaw it till it falls off. It's not going to be pretty, and it's sort of like, that's how I hate failing. It bothers me like crazy, but I just kind of do it. I once learned from an Olympic figure skater once about confidence. Her partner was an alcoholic, and she had to lie to the press about it, and she was fighting an eating issue, and she was just saying, Dan, I'm going crazy. I got this job. I'm doing all this. But, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, first I was really worried about it, but she goes, but at the end of the day, I know I can be an Olympic champion. And it was sort of like, there's all this crap going on, but there's sort of like a belief if I persist and I keep going. So a part of it's sort of like a grit. I mean, and I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. It's not consulting. I remember as a doctoral student sitting in a cubicle at the University of Illinois for 3 hours and writing one paragraph and wondering if I should quit the program. And Reiner Martins will tell you, I was the worst writer he ever had. He told me that, but then he told at the other end, he said, I improved more than anybody ever had when I graduated. But I remember sitting in there, like, almost crying, like, because am I going to be able to get this done? And I don't know what it is, but I think some of that comes with consulting. Like, if I make a mistake consulting, it bothers the heck out of me. You know, I try to flush the toilet, I do all the things, and it's just like, okay, I got to fix it. And it's just that passion combined with grit and pit bulls.
Yeah, plus I play golf, and so I can hit horrible shots and have a bad score. If you're a golfer, you know this, but then you hit one, and everybody says that's the one that'll bring you back. Same thing with consulting. And if you do it, I think what draws so many students to the field, I think if we like sports psychology, is that you're working with people. And so, yeah, when you have that one connection, and that just, it makes the other 20 mistakes or non-effective situations worthwhile.
I want to thank our panel members for being super vulnerable with us and showcasing their failures and being actually eager to share them with us. I think that was super great. You made my job really easy organizing this. But I want to open the floor to you all for questions if you have any.
Hi, thank you for sharing this and your experiences. My question is, how do you repair trust when you do make a mistake? When you, maybe in individual sessions, it happens more, or in the context where you may have said something that upset a player, a coach. So how do you repair the trust in the relationship after you've made a mistake?
Yeah, it's a really good question. A good example is I have this thing where obviously what athletes tell me are confidential, but then sometimes I'll have permission from them to give the coach a general view, but somehow they feel like I violated confidentiality, which I didn't do, but somehow it got perceived that way. To me, it's first come out and just be very direct. Hey, that happened. I feel terrible about it, et cetera. Or I gave them advice and it didn't work. They do this routine and you'll hit better in softball and you just had a terrible game. You need to own it. Sometimes in sports psych, it's sort of like we shouldn't be owning the successes, but if there's a failure, like, hey, that was my mistake, apologize and do it and just sort of try to work back. And then hopefully, there's a sort of a harsh reality. You need enough wins when you're working with them. Sometimes I'll be one-on-one with a client, an athlete, and I know there's something big that could really help them, but they don't trust me yet. So I'll do little things that I think that will work, that will build up their confidence, that aren't as scary to them until we build a relationship high enough till I can challenge them and tell them what they really need to hear. So to me, it's sort of like getting some quick little wins as we go forward. And it's really hard because this big thing would help them, but you also know they're not ready for it or the relationship's not ready for it.
Yeah, I would agree. I would make myself totally vulnerable. Kathleen had asked that question, take responsibility. The other thing, though, but then I don't ask or expect that they're going to just trust me. I'm like, okay, just stay with me. I mean, I'm going to show let's just move forward. And I feel like I have to kind of earn that. You have to earn it. It can't be given.
One of my favorite axioms is Tim Elmore. He says, build relationships so strong it can bear the weight of truth. And I think that's so pertinent in our what we do. Build relationships so strong that they can bear the weight of truth. And there have been multiple moments in my career where something like that's happened and you repair it and they're like, okay, good, that's my fault, we're good. And to be quite honest, there's relationships where it was perceived to breach confidentiality, or maybe I underestimated the strength of our relationship, and I was honest, and we never recovered. We just never recovered, to be quite honest. And to the point to where I shot a text to this individual, hey, how you doing? And ghosting me, where I know they're active on social media, but sometimes that happens, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different things, and it's different for every situation. But the depth of relationship is so important.
That's a great point. You're not going to be effective with everybody. You're going to try, and it just kills you in the gut when you're not. But sometimes you just don't link personally as well. Hopefully you're not ineffective and terrible, but sometimes it's okay. And other times, like Robin would say, you connect with this person like, wow, this is like a different planet. We're like reading each other's minds. They're really getting better. Those are the great consults.
When I first proposed this panel to Dan, that was the comment he said to me. He said, the first thing that comes to mind is when you're a young consultant, you think you're going to knock everyone out of the park, or that you should. And yes, that should be our goal. We want to be great. He goes, but realistically, it's like a game of thirds. 1/3, you do great. 1/3, you knock out of the park. The next third, you're fine. You're maintaining. It's okay. You're probably going to see them again. The other third, you probably fail, and you probably won't see them again, especially when you're young. And that's really hard to take as a young consultant, because we might have 3 clients. Like, oh, shoot, one is going to be great. One's not going to be hot. The other one's going to be a disaster, right? So I think with experience, that game of thirds, or that rule of thirds, is easier to accept. But it goes back to that one win that you can get, as your push forward.
But you need to remember, one out of 3, you make it to the Baseball Hall of Fame as a hitter.
That's right. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Great panel. I think I'm a big admirer of the work you guys do. One thing that comes to my mind is, like, we always ask our athletes to have deliberate practice, to do things with a purpose. I was wondering what you guys do on the daily basis to improve your craft. What are the things that you guys try to achieve daily in a consistent manner?
I think Justin might be able to take this one, because his personal tagline involves those words. So
Yeah, doing things on purpose with purpose. Yeah, it's I love that. Vanessa Shannon, one of my good friends, she said something that really that resonated with me, and I might have butchered it now, as I think it's evolved. But you told me one time that basically your level of competence needs to be the level of the athlete you're working with, or something to that degree. Like, basically, know your stuff. Like, be competent at what you do, and that really resonated with me. And I think about that, and I look at the athletes, the best of the best athletes who I have the privilege and the honor of working with. If they're spending their lives dedicating to be the best that they can at what they're doing, how could I not? How could I not wake up every single morning and live on and win the morning by listening to study the research, or to learn how to be a better storyteller, or to learn techniques on how to connect with coaches, and dig into the science of whatever we're teaching. And for me personally, it's built into my day every single day, whether it be a podcast, and I always have this book, and taking notes, and then teaching and executing, reviewing notes, going over what I could have done better. But that's just something that I personally have tried to do, especially being surrounded by people who are really good at what they do. I just want to be able to do the same thing.
I think we have to practice everything we work with athletes on. We have to do it. Several years ago, again, I started playing competitive golf again. I mean, just locally in tournaments. And I was working with a male basketball player at the time. It was the summer. And I remember, like, I blew up in a tournament, and I said to him, I forgot how hard this is. And then, like, 3 years ago, I had the worst choking experience. I mean, I totally choked in the club. I mean, totally. So I'm choking, right? And I can't do anything about it. But I was being reflective. Oh, this is great. I can tell my students about this. But I could not control it. It was humbling. I mean, I couldn't, but you know, it was a great experience to have that because I understand it. So I think we have to practice all of that, to be honest about it.
First of all, thank you. But I want to address something you mentioned, not working hard on your athletes. The question I have about that is, how do you recognize or differentiate between that being a will thing or a skill thing, where their pushback is coming in?
I'm sorry, I don't, can you repeat the question? I don't think I understand.
Sure. So like being trauma informed, like knowing that there's perhaps some pushback because it's, you know, something they don't understand or they're lacking a skill, versus it's a will thing, like they just don't want to do it.
It's not easy, but again, it depends where you are in the relationship. Sometimes you have to call them out. I mean, I remember a kid, Hunter, I worked with many, many years ago, a young tennis player, really liked him. And he was talented, but he'd sort of get ready like 2 weeks before the big tournament and wouldn't train hard all year long. And when he was younger, he could get away with it because he was talented. And I said, well, 90% of the people you beat are no longer around, Hunter. And the other ones are doing work when you're not. So my office is by a river that runs through campus. You need to go sit on that log for 20 minutes and decide, are you a gut check. Do you want this or do you not want it? And if you don't want it, that's okay. But don't come in complaining about you're not getting what you want if you're not putting the effort in. So sometimes there's quite a bit of emotional intelligence of how you do it and the relationship you have with the person. But sometimes you just have to tell them, like, hey, I'm kind of trying to figure this out here. It sounds like you know the skill, but do you not want to do it? Or you're not confident? Tell me about that. So maybe kind of ask them questions and tell me if I'm right here. Help me understand is another way.
You know, one of the quotes that Kathleen had on the slide was something that I had sent her, and I don't know if you guys have read Atomic Habits by James Clear. It was 2018. I read it this summer, and I loved it. And he uses the quote, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And it's so true. And so back to my point, like athletes, you know, I expect them to develop systems, not just we set these goals or we have these ideas of what we want to do. They have to do it. And then, there's the SMART goal setting. Well, I like to say you have to sweat your goals and not just change the acronym around, but it's specific and the W is written. And I get this all the time. I don't like to write things down. Well, that's what we're going to do. And that's the calling the out. I mean, like if you're going to be systematic, you can keyboard it or whatever, but you have to do that. Because to be systematic, to be specific, written, energizing, aggressive, time-bound. That's the goal-setting thing, but I'm always like, you have to sweat your goals. You can't just set them, be smart, but that, to me, is the will part.
Hi, thank you for coming to the panel. Since we're talking about mistakes and challenges, especially in the field of consulting, I wanted to know, when you guys fail, what type of social support do you have to fall back on?
Colleague called Bob Weinberg in Miami, we talk to each other. It really helps. Yep.
For me, it's my wife. And it's good having a go-to person, because this field is lonely. Like, it's lonely sometimes, and you're kicking yourself and you're thinking, and a lot of times if you've been in the field for a little bit, you experience this imposter syndrome. Do I belong here? Like, are they going to find me out? I really have no idea what I'm talking about, and so that's totally normal. And so I'll bounce ideas off of my wife, or I'll talk to a family member. Sometimes it is a colleague. Sometimes it's another coach. Just building a network of people in the field, out of the field, family members, just so I could kind of articulate and go through things. And depends on what it is, will impact who I reach out to. But my wife hears it all, obviously. But yeah, that's how it is for me personally.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you look at the social support research, they'll talk about informational support, emotional support, et cetera. And I learned early in my career with my wife, there's some things I won't tell her because I might be mad at my boss one day or something and then I come home. Well, if she meets him at a party, she doesn't forget. I'm over it. So And once I had a cease and desist order for something that was unfounded in North Carolina. They said I was practicing psychology without a license, which was very anxiety provoking. I called Steve Danish up, a friend who was a counseling psychologist. I called because clinical counseling that could kind of help me there. Other people I'll call if because they're positive, if I'm down. So to me, it's like, here are my different social support providers. Who can I go with? And then, again, if I'm having a really bad day, I don't want to go to the pessimists and hang out with them. I want to be with somebody more optimistic. So.
Good question.
I think just as a follow-up to that, one of the questions that I asked them before we started this panel was, how do you know you failed? Because a lot of the time it's self-reflection that's guiding whether or not we claim it as failure. And so I think your question about the support systems that you have in place are also helpful for understanding if your failure is genuine failure or not. And I can say that from experience co-consulting, and that's a really hard thing to do because you have different styles, different approaches, but you're working with the same people. And that person was supportive and challenged me a lot. And often I felt like I failed, and that person said, heck no, you didn't fail. Look at it this way. And so I think that's also a really valuable piece of having a support system and being picky about who's in that.
Thank you.
Hello. I was wondering if you could talk about how you facilitate this process with graduate students or students that you're mentoring. So when they feel like they're failing and maybe aren't ready to reflect on that immediately.
How we help people do.
Yes.
Yeah, basically, how do you help graduate students through this?
So the question is, just for everybody, the question is, if you are supervising graduate students, how do you help them navigate this failure in a way that helps them in the future?
One is, be open about your own failures. Two, empathy is part of it. Again, there's some art to it. It's a support and challenge again. So if Kathleen comes in, I'm obviously going to be supportive. But if I think the pity party's going on too long in a nice way, I've got to kind of challenge her. Well, in soccer, did you ever fail? Well, tell me about those. Okay, what did you do? And sort of work through it. So it's this combination of empathy, support. It's not easy. I mean, it's.
As you know, Megan, I think you have my class. I mean, in my graduate
This explains
class,
a lot.
Yeah.
No wonder you need help.
So I have students do consulting, and then they have to write a reflective paper about it. And so, and I tell them, you don't get an A because you're writing the paper, everything went right. And I had a student once who, her consulting, and they do it like 4 times across the semester, and every paper was like, it went great. Everything was perfect. That never happens. And so she got like a C, and she came to see me, and I'm like, this isn't real. So I think encouraging them to be reflective, like Kathleen showed at the very beginning of our panel, being reflective about that, and me saying like it's okay. I mean, it kind of cracks me up. One of the big things with high school athletes, they're obsessed about mistakes. Right? We spend so much time on that. And it's kind of the same thing with the students, that mistakes are kind of okay, but you need to be reflective, and that's kind of how you learn. So I think you need to push that.
For me, I had the chance, so at IMG Academy, we had a lot of grad students who came and interned for summer interns, and we kind of thrust them in to go teach sessions, and I love that. One thing, to just normalize the process. I think the way you frame failure as opposed to, how did you fail? It's like, okay, what do you need to improve on? And I think the best grad students, the best athletes, the best practitioners and whatever it is, they don't want some of the ones that I've seen at least, they don't want someone to help them feel good, that feel better, they want someone to help them be better. So they're the ones who seek the critical feedback. Hey, give me something, don't tell me what I'm doing really well. And I think research, I read some research somewhere where the more elite, the higher level athletes or performers, they want more critical feedback. They don't want the fluffy, tell me what I did good. Oh, great eye contact. Oh, great this is. No, give me some stuff to make me better. And so I think just that's what we with young students working, when I have the chance to work with them, just not a failure. This is something you can get better at that can help you be more effective.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I actually have a specific question for Robin, but I would like to hear anybody's thoughts on it. I am a strength and conditioning coach, Robin. So my question to you, my background is a lot of technical training. So I love the science, the physiology, and that sort of things. And I always came at strength and conditioning from the angle of technical first. It's got to be very precise. It has to be done perfectly, form over function, all of that kind of stuff. And when you mentioned sort of that, you came into this sort of sports psychology world and you wanted to kind of be a pleaser. You wanted people to like you and you wanted to be an entertainer and that sort of thing, but you've moved away from that. So one of the things that I've learned the most in the past past many years, is that without the motivation and engagement, nothing ever happens with people. So my question to you is, because motivation drives engagement and engagement essentially drives success, should we not have some focus initially on just purely driving engagement, being likable, being motivating, that sort of thing, so then you can then thread in the technical, tactical of what you need to create that outcome?
Yeah, great question. And you're right, it's not an either or. And I think at the beginning, I kind of have you hook them in interest. And even back to, Justin's in his stories, and then your mirror. I mean, I guess you're not a mirror, but you still have the story. You want to hook people at first. But at some point, they have to do the work. That's the will versus the skill. And so, but absolutely, and I think it's like being a good coach. I mean, it's the same as being a good mental coach. You don't plan sessions that are too long. Variety, hands-on. You help them learn how to take that away and then use it on their own. Like my hockey player, I know what to do now. Well, that was huge because he does know what to do now. But absolutely, I have to be engaging and I have to bring my, if I'm tired, that doesn't matter. It's like teaching, and I've got to be engaging and pique their interest as well. So, absolutely. I'm not saying that's not there. It's just they've got to do their part. They've got to do that. And if they don't, then game over.
So one word that you said a few times, the word motivation, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room, ping, 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 self-determination theory just started popping up in your mind, and I think the best coaches, whether it be strength and conditioning coaches, athletic coaches, they create a climate to where the athletes or the people motivate themselves. So it's not necessarily your job to motivate them, but how do you create a climate to where they motivate themselves? And for those who are not familiar with the self-determination theory, and not to what's the word, oversimplify it, is the climate you're creating, is it helping establish competence? Do they feel like does the athlete feel like they're improving, getting better at what they're doing? Is there a sense of autonomy? Do they have a sense of control in their learning and their growing? And finally, the relatedness. Are you creating a culture where they're connecting with each other and to you and to what's going on? And the research is showing that if you do that, you're more likely to create an environment where the athletes motivate themselves.
I think this is the last question.
All right. Thank you for sharing your experiences, first of all. One of the themes that came up quite often was the imposter syndrome and feeling like you don't want to look like an idiot. So 2 questions. 1, do you guys still feel that ever? And 2, how do you feel like it's helped you working with athletes who obviously are going through the exact same thing in their life?
Yeah, I felt a little bit on this panel, you just kind of do. I know several years ago I got invited to do the Coleman Griffith talk, and when the president called to invite me, I was like, oh, I'd love to talk to you, Craig. I have some ideas about who could do the talk. And he was like, no, Robin, I want you to do the talk. And I was stunned. And I spent a summer worrying about that, back to my wanting to be liked or having to say something really important. So for me, I think that is there. And I'm a real preparation person, and that makes me prepare and work harder. And then, I know I'm okay. But yes, that fleeting feeling still goes through me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I still have self-doubts, and you get better at coping, and you develop. It's a lot like being an athlete. You have a mistake ritual, you learn how to deal with it and try to put it to bed. But I gave a talk this summer for our football staff, and it ended up getting truncated in 15 minutes, and I never got any feedback, and it's bothering me today. And I've asked that trainer, I don't know if I blew it, if it didn't go well, and that sort of sticks with you. And at the same time, Keith Henchen one time said something that I don't know the research behind it, but he said the great athletes, I hope I get this right, they're not afraid of success, but they fear failure. And sometimes I think that's me. I fear failure. I don't want to fail. I want everybody to like me, but I also want to be good. And at the same time, I really want to be successful, but if I get an award, I'm always embarrassed. So it's a weird thing. But yeah, you still have self-doubts. You get better at dealing with them, but, you know, and you get scared sometimes. You know, in our case at Michigan State, the Larry Nassar thing breaks. He once sent a diver to me. I'm going, oh my God, is the police going to be at my office? And did I do everything right? And, you know, it just was a reminder. So yeah, that you have them, and you just like athletes or other people, you have to deal with them. And to say you don't have them would be like Karch today saying he was one of the best Mr. Volleyball in the world, and he still had self-doubts.
Can I be really quick? Super quick. So I feel it as well. Dunning-Kruger effect. I found myself, the further my career goes, the more I experience. So Dunning-Kruger effect is a correlation between experience and confidence. Basically shows that when you are a novice at what you do, your confidence level of how much you know is disproportional. So it's like you watching that great documentary on meditation, and all of a sudden you're the meditation guru, and you're like, you know everything. Or when I graduated grad school, I was like, who can I mental skill today? Give me Kobe, give me Tiger, give me, and then as I start going on, and I start to think, I know nothing. The further along I get, the more I realize I don't know about that. I don't know about this, and teach me. I need to learn. And so it happens all the time. But if I remember early on, I was riding high, read that book. I'm like, okay, I know all about this. And then you realize, no, I really don't. So that's the Dunning-Kruger in effect. And so, and it's a really neat research as well. So I don't know if this ever happened to anyone else, but it happens to me.
If they have to jet, so I'm going to let them get out of here, but I do want to leave on one parting note that what I noticed when they all were speaking was that they have a really optimistic outlook towards failure, and I think that that's the key. They look at it as a valuable tool in what they do, and it has gotten them as far as they have, and it's been a crucial piece of what they do. So I think that that's a really key thing. I noticed it in all the ways that they told stories, and I think right now as a young practitioner, we often fear it and we're nervous about it, but it's almost something you should welcome in, because it helps you advance as you go throughout your career. So I want to thank them, and thank you all for coming. We really appreciate having you.